Good morning from the KTN News Center here in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. This past week, Kenyans celebrated a very unique kind of Madaraka Day in the wake of the coronavirus mitigation measures. The President, Uhuru Kenyatta, addressing or giving the 57th Madaraka Day address, and in that, giving the clearest indication yet that he was going to lead this nation in changing the Kenyan Constitution 2010. He did speak in a lot of anecdotes, all which pointed to one thing, even quoting Father of the Nation, Tom Joseph Mboya, when he said that Kenyans should not be constitutionally rigid and that the Constitution is not an end in itself, but a means. So what is happening? Is the BBI going to finally lead to a constitutional referendum? We'll get into that. In the same week, the President issued an Executive Order number 1 of 2020 that was issued in January and revised last month. And among other things, what we want to focus on today is something that centered on the judiciary, something that the judiciary has not taken very kindly. That is what the Chief Justice David Maraga referred to as that the President cannot purport to assign functions to any part of the judiciary, not less constitutional commissions. The Law Society of Kenya has also joined in that row, saying that that order is indeed illegal. This has in turn stirred up a debate about the a key pillar in the Kenyan Constitution, that is separation of powers. Just what gives there? Let's stay on the House on the Hill now and talk about that much anticipated June 6th presidential address on the way forward in terms of the mitigation measures on COVID-19. That is, the President saying that Kenya is not yet ready to open up the country, but it did shorten that dusk to dawn curfew from 10 hours to 7 hours. It will start at 9 p.m. and then at 4 a.m. This is Inside Politics. I am Ben Kitili. My panelists are here with me. I have with me political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. I have with me governance expert Hesbon Owila, back in the show after a kind of a hiatus. We also have lawyer Kenneth Chesa. We also have lawyer and political strategist Kipchumba Karori joining us from our City Center studios. And we'll also be joined on the program by Mark Bichache, communication strategist. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure having you with me here to try and help Kenyans put perspective on the biggest political and policy issues in the Republic. Be sure to stay with us for the next 120 minutes as we debate these issues for you. Let's begin with what happened yesterday with the way forward, the President Uhuru Kenyatta giving the way forward on the latest mitigation measures on the coronavirus global pandemic.
It was a much-anticipated address. The President, backed by experts, here for the much-needed defense of the Commander-in-Chief's decision. Uhuru Kenyatta gave himself a pat on the back for the containment measures that have been in place.
Had we not taken the stringent measures that we did in March of 2020, the rate of infections in Kenya would have peaked to 800,000 people by July 30th of this year.
With many Kenyans hoping for a relaxation of the containment measures, the President's address was informed by remodeling and projections by experts. What ifs? According to the experts, relaxing the measures by 20% would lead to 200,000 infections and 30,000 deaths by December this year. If the interventions are relaxed by 40%, infections will peak in November with 300,000 cases and 40,000 deaths. If done by 60%, the cases will go up in October with 450,000 infections and 45,000 fatalities.
Although these projections are generated by a model, our experts have shown us hard evidence suggesting that countries which opened up without proper protocols also experienced serious waves or secondary waves of infections.
The President's decision, he says, was informed by 3 things he terms as the threshold for relaxing the measures: containment of infections, a healthcare system adequately prepared to handle a surge in infections, and adequate capacity for surveillance and contact tracing.
So the question then we must all ponder together, fellow Kenyans, is whether we have met this threshold or these three thresholds in order to lift the restrictions. Have the cases, as I have said, of infections taken a downward turn, for instance? The answer is definitely no.
126 new infections have been recorded, bringing the total number of cases to 2,600. 4 more people have lost their lives, raising the death toll to 83, while 63 people have been discharged from hospital. The number of recoveries now stands at 706. Experts say the worst is yet to come.
There is a level of where people begin to get infected. In Kenya now, we are actually seeing an upward trend, meaning that we have not peaked yet.
With COVID-19 numbers on an upward trend, the country continues with a struggle to flatten the curve. And for now, Kenyans will have to live with the containment measures. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
Thank you, Rita. So the president did speak. The experts also spoke. 30 more days of those containment measures. Some of those measures have been lifted, like, of course, made better, like the dusk to dawn nationwide curfew. That was 10 hours. It's now 7 hours from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. That will continue also for the next 30 days. Hesbon, is this the right direction?
Well, Ben, I think this is probably the right direction, given the trends that we are seeing in other countries. And I think for me, the biggest thing that Kenyans need to focus on is our recovery rates. If you look at the number of people we've tested, the cases that we have, and the recovery rate, you realize that our recovery rate stands at 27.15, which pretty much tells you that we are not recovering at a higher rate enough to cushion us from, cases that might overwhelm our medical system. Now, if you compare the measures that we've taken in 2 other countries, in Uganda and South Africa, they also have these measures. I think Uganda has more strict measures compared to Kenya. And that is understandable because their recovery rate is at 13%. In as much as they don't have any, case fatality rate, there is not death in Uganda. But then look at South Africa, which is proving to be a model in Africa. Their recovery rate is at 52%. Now, if at 52%, and this is a country that has tested close to 895,000 people, and they've instituted measures that monitor areas where they test.
Right.
So with a recovery rate of 52%, and they've not yet opened up, it tells you that opening up is not an option for many countries at this point. And what is important is to find a middle ground between how do you measure and get cases and deal with these cases to the recovery point with minimal fatality rates. And I think the president is well informed. I think he has an infrastructure that informs him on all this. And it is just important that we appreciate the measures that have been taken to address issues of the economy to some extent. I mean, we have 3 more hours through which we can be a lot more innovative in what we do.
Right.
When individuals are looking at the measures, they're looking at it from an individual point of view, pockets of the economy, and they hold the president responsible for just them as individuals. But I think the president has this overarching responsibility to look at the different pockets,
All right.
because if there is anything, again, all these guys will blame the government.
This was in the run-up to yesterday. Kenyans were debating and cajoling and even joking, almost begging the president to open up and lift some of these measures. The president, quite rightly, did speak about the wisdom of both opening and not opening. What do you think Kenyans are coming from?
Well, the president sits in a very unique position. He has to take a decision around lives and livelihoods. And majority of the people who were expecting that the president was going to open up the economy, they were looking at their livelihoods, that they've stayed home for a very long time, and their pockets are beginning to wear down, that the economic implication is becoming too much. And there was this valid expectation that the president then is going to give a roadmap, or now he's going to open the economy. But in giving the roadmap, he gives us very clear directions, which he failed to do. And you remember, we've said times above number that the president needs to give us an exit strategy so that we know where we are. When we started off by closing the economy, where exactly were we? And what performance indicators do we need to achieve for the president to say we've won this war? That one has not come out clearly, meaning that now Kenyans are shooting blind, we are driving blind, we don't know exactly where we are going. Yesterday, you had some experts speaking from State House. How I wish that these experts were given the opportunity to brief us on a regular basis. Now, Professor Wheeler speaks about South Africa. But in South Africa, the gentleman responsible for this pandemic operation comes on national TV on a regular basis, and he briefs South Africans. They understand exactly where they are. So that if the president says we are going to open the economy in the next 10 days, when we get into these targets, then everybody is carried along. But right now, the information we get from the national government is centralized. The numbers given by Mutahi Kagwe, there's nobody who can verify whether in fact they're accurate or not. We don't know how many Kenyans are infected. We may never know. But we need to increase the number of testing so that we've got a bigger sample. As we sit right now, we have less than 100,000 people who've been tested. So for a fact, we don't know how many people have been infected. And even the few who have died from these crises, we don't know whether it's actually corona which has killed them or opportunistic infection. So we need a lot of information. Then number two, we need really to look and ask ourselves, is a curfew a security instrument or a public healthcare instrument? Because when you look at the logic of saying, I'm now going to let people hang out till 9 o'clock, what is really the logic? And we're saying that we want to create a 24-hour economy. Now, for somebody who runs an organization, maybe they've employed, say, 100 people. Right. There's a chance for them to create more opportunities if you create a shift system. So if we say we are going to lift the curfew and then we go back to a 24-hour economy, it's very easy to create a shift system. So somebody also needs to explain to us whether, in fact, having a curfew is a security response to a healthcare crisis, or whether it actually makes sense. Because there's no evidence.
Don't you think having the curfew start at 9 gets Kenyans back to normal operations during the day? Like you can work from 8 to 5 without having to rush home. That kind of opens up the economy, does it?
So what is this magic between 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning that you have to get the nation into a standstill? Why can't we just open? Because you see, if you don't want people mixing in the middle of the night at social places where they're likely to pick the virus, just close all the bars, ensure that, that there are no church meetings in the middle of the night, that the only places which may be open are places of work. So that for the people who are struggling in Kenya today, who are about to lay off, then they have an opportunity of doing even 3-shift system. Okay. But if you just close it like that, then Kenyans may begin to think that the government is approaching, it's not giving this thing critical thinking. They're using lazy approaches to a very serious national security concern.
All right, Mark, there's an apathy, kind of apathy that has been creeping in among Kenyans. Talk of that the virus is here to stay. We have to live with the new normal, so we might as well just reopen everything. And the president and his experts obviously disagreed. What is your take on this?
The cavalier attitude that Kenyans classically have of kufa gari, kufa dereva, cannot fly in such a circumstance. And I disagree vehemently with Dismas when he says we are left without direction. I think the president was very clear on the 3 things that we need to manage. Number 1, are the numbers coming down? Number 2, do we have the facilities? And just on the facilities, Ben, I think it's time we started talking about a special center for these kind of diseases, because the only way we can move forward is we have a specialized clinic. I think they're called infectious disease hospitals, which have negative pressure and are able to keep our healthcare workers safe. They're able to keep our doctors safe, and that's where Kenyans should be able to run. So far, we have isolation centers, and isolation centers are not the same as infectious disease hospitals. If you look at countries like Singapore and places like that, they've been able to keep the diseases down because of such centers. So number 1, I think we need to follow what the president has said, and the president needs to actually follow up on his word and actually create an infectious disease hospital, not just because of COVID, because we know in in coming days we'll be threatened by Ebola again, we'll be threatened by all of these very highly communicable diseases. And that is very clear in my mind. What we need is a facility to treat our people when and if they fall sick. Let us also not forget that in as much as Kenyans are behaving and saying that it's because of the curfew that they are not working well, that's not true. Let us look at how many people are being irresponsible. Last night, there was a club somewhere in the east of Nairobi that had to be shut down by force because it had people drinking in it. So is this thing being infected by the government? Is Uhuru Kenyatta carrying the virus from mouth to mouth so that people are sick? Absolutely not. But are there things that the government can do? Yes, there are. And that's why the counties of Busia and Siaya were called out. And also the national government needs to step up and build an actual facility, a mobile facility, if need be, quickly to treat this disease so that we can get back to work.
All right, good comment there. Ken, when the president was speaking yesterday, one of the reasons he gave why we cannot reopen yet is because some of those factors that need to be in place before we can reopen have not been fulfilled. That includes Kenya's ICU isolation bed capacity that is not enough. If there was to be a spike in infections, Kenya would not be able to handle it. And he gave a few examples, including Siaya, which he said has an ICU isolation bed capacity of 10, and none of those beds have already been filled. There are so many, there are all kinds of jokes, going with that, the people of Siaya, but this really is a story across the country, really, isn't it?
Yes, Ben. First, when we appeared for this show last Sunday, almost all of us were agreeing to the fact that opening up the economy and opening up the country was of utmost importance to the people of Kenya. But again, we agreed that we must put the necessary infrastructure in place, including mitigation factors to deal with the post-opening of the economy. When the president singled out that the country was ill-prepared, he fell short of saying that the country was ill-prepared to open now, because the ICU isolation beds in Siaya and Busia and other counties is actually not up to the expected standards. I have been in Kakamega, the new teaching and referral hospital, and when we went there to view the facility last time I was in the village, we only had 6 beds. And that cannot be the capacity if we were to open up, and we have tragic cases in Kakamega. So away from the jokes that Kenyans were making about Siaya, Busia, and the president not opening the economy, I think the president was advised properly, and that is why he has convened a Council of Governors meeting on Wednesday this week to strategize on how every county is prepared to deal with this particular situation. Once we've opened up, every county ought to deal with the situation as if it were a state or a government on its own. And I expect that it is only the tragic cases that will be referred to our institutions that had been established to address this particular issue. And therefore, Kenyans should be patient for the next 30 days. It was in the interest of the nation that we have 30 days within which government can prepare adequately for complete reopening. And the president, I think, was not well prepared, or the nation was not well prepared to open yesterday and to deal with the consequences. So the government should seize the opportunity. All the players, the national government, the county government, the health sector, the general public, to prepare for the total opening, perhaps in 30 days. And if we shall be where we were yesterday, at the completion of 30 days, the president will still be justified to keep us locked and to maintain the curfew, as though, even though Dismas says that the curfew is not very productive, but I hope the curfew is okay, instilling some form of discipline among Kenyans who are known to disregard regulations. And by the way, the curfew is the only respected regulation where we have 80% compliance. Masks, we have about 30–40% compliance, and other regulations. So I am of the opinion that we support the president in his efforts, in his resolutions, and within 30 days, if we are a disciplined nation, then we are going to open up the economy.
All right. Kipchumba, you've been opposed to blind lockdowns. That's what you've called them. What's your take on? It's another 30 days in Nairobi, Mandera, and Mombasa, and another 30 days of the curfew. Although this time it starts at 9 p.m. Are you happy?
The president was between a rock and a hard place, but the compromise was a good one. But what we must ask ourselves going forward, Ben, is that whereas we are doing this for the health and the pandemic that is happening in the entire nation, in the entire world, sorry, we must ask ourselves, are we carrying the citizenry of this country along? Because whereas we are doing this, we are reducing the hours to 7 hours for the curfew and other things that are in place. We must ask ourselves, is it sustainable for the normal mwananchi? And what is the government doing to ameliorate that? Because when you put people in a curfew and all these other protocols, you are supposed to give them an alternative for them to get a livelihood and for them also to make sure that they make a living out of the time we have gotten. And then again, I ask myself, just like Dismas, what is the scientific method that made the president to come to the conclusion that between 9 and 5 in the morning, by having that curfew, will be curbing the spread of corona? What we must make sure is that the protocols we have in place are there to make sure that we sustain public health and there are not security apparatus as they are ordinarily. Because having this curfew, I was yesterday in Rongai between 5 and 6, and I can tell you, Ben, the kind of crowding in that place at that time, I kept thinking in my mind, are we making progress with these curfew things? Because if people are mingling in a market, around 10,000 people in a normal evening like that, how much are we doing? So I think moving forward, what we should do is that we must adapt a protocol whereby it moves the health protocol from government to personal, so that people take individual responsibility, because we can never be in a curfew forever as a state. We need to move forward. 2, we need to make sure that we have safeguards for those people who have been affected. Ben, why isn't nobody is asking the question, how are the people who have been employed by the faith-based organization earning their pay? How are we working on that to make sure that these people also earn a living and continue their lives? So, and then again, the president yesterday did not say something about those people who are losing their jobs. We need to have a cushion for these people, because for us to move forward as a nation, for us to obey all the protocols, somebody must have something in the table for them to make sure that their well-being is continuous, and obeying of the curfew and the protocols is made such that it's not an end in itself, but it is a means to an end.
All right. Hesbon, what does 30 more days of lockdown, partial lockdown, or if you can call it that, the cessation of movement in Nairobi, Mandera, and Mombasa mean vis-a-vis, in terms of the government, really cushioning the economy in regards to Kenyans will not be moving out of Nairobi and Mandera and Mombasa and vice versa for 30 more days? Is it an extra expense?
Well, I think it's going to be very hard for so many people, especially with regards to movement. Now that, that cessation of movement in and out of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kwale, and Mandera still stays, that's a big deal for businesses and economic players who depend on movement. But then I think a few issues that, especially what Kipchumba is raising, questions of how do we sustain livelihoods, how do we address issues of job losses and critical sectors of the economy, that are probably dysfunctional simply because of, first, the fear of exposing yourself to this disease. And it brings to the fore what Mark is saying about, the fact that you're going to live with this virus for some time, and the need to have hospitals and other sectors of the economy operate optimally.
All right.
And therefore that calls for, a specialized hospital for infectious diseases where people can be safe to free the other hospitals for people who are afraid of going to hospital for the simple reason that they fear that contact. But again, I think it's also important to look at it from a very positive point of view, that there is an extension of working hours, in which case Kenyans can make the most of that if they obey other measures like social distancing, ensuring that they are protected using masks.
All right.
And it's also important to address what Dismas has raised, that what is the rationale for a curfew? You know, when a policy is in place to address something, the only way you can enforce that policy is by reverting back to the law. And I think that's where the curfew comes in, through the Public Health Act, that we cannot, in a way, ensure that Kenyans obey some of these things because of the policy of containing this virus and reducing the transmission of the virus, unless there is something that we can use legally. Kenya is a very liberal country, and there is no way you are going to enforce any policy unless it is anchored within the law.
All right.
But from what I see, I think the president has given businessmen, economic players a leeway to maximize on the additional 3 hours and be productive.
Mark, I have the final say on this. The president will be meeting the 47 governors next week, or this coming week, on Wednesday. What should be top on the agenda?
Top on the agenda should be a coordinated approach towards how they are going to manage COVID-19 infections. Coordinated, by that I mean, can counties share resources in terms of, if we know Nairobi is going to have a lot of cases, can those cases overflow to the neighboring counties? Secondly, the governors must push the president to have a referral level hospital within Nairobi that is basically targeted at handling COVID-19. And I've studied, Ben, I've spent a lot of time studying how the Asian countries have been able to manage this, and without a specialized hospital, turning our schools into isolation centers is not going to work. But secondly, and most importantly, society itself must begin to understand that we need to change how we do business, and we need to change how we think of a thing called time. If you're still thinking 8 to 5, COVID has come to change that completely. And let me tell you, Uhuru Kenyatta opening up the economy or removing the curfew is not going to change the business reality. Remember, we do not have a business or a commercial lockdown in Kenya. What we have is people staying at home for a few hours. And if you're staying at home and you're unable to think differently about your business and about your employment, trust you me, the lifting of the curfew will not save you from what is coming.
Kenneth Chesa, allow me to ask you this final question. You are an educationist, as you are a lawyer. What schools remain closed countrywide until September at the very least? What is your take on this?
My take on this as an educationist and as a former teacher, I'm in support of it because children are vulnerable members of our society, and we cannot risk children in their large numbers in schools at a time when this pandemic or when this disease is spreading very fast. In fact, in September, what we ought to have is a pilot program on whether we can recall our learners to schools. Wholesome opening of schools will equally be counterproductive. And I've always maintained that there was no way we are going to have a national examination this year. And Ben, it does not kill this society, does not kill our nation, having our children home until we are very sure that this learning environment is safe for them. One, we don't have infrastructure, be it in terms of human resource or even the physical building. Look at Chavakali High School, for example, with a candidate class of 600 students in Form 4. And we are being told that we shall have 15 students in every room. That one requires about 40 classrooms to have Form 4 alone in school. Chavakali could be having about 36 rooms from Form 1 to Form 4. Where are we going to get the extra 4 classes? Then it means that at every lesson, every 40 minutes of a lesson, we have 40 teachers in classroom teaching the same things. Chavakali has about 76 teachers. These teachers will not rest from 8 to 4. So in terms of education, we are ill prepared to call our children to school and maintain social distance and have them attain quality education.
All right. Let's leave it at that. We are keeping an eye on this story for you. Of course, shall be giving you the latest updates on the coronavirus infections and the recoveries and, of course, the mitigation measures. You're watching Inside Politics here on KTN News. Time for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be getting into politics proper, talking about referendum drumbeats. President Uhuru Kenyatta dropping the biggest indication yet that he will be leading this country to a referendum to change the Constitution of Kenya 2010. What is your take on this? And on that note, here is Siasa Files. Then KANU National Vice Chairman Noah Katanangala speaking. The year is 2002.
Tutachagua yule atakayechaguliwa na timu ya Kasarani aweze kuchukua kama torch bearer wa nchi. Ndivyo ama sivyo? Yasemekana namna hiyo. Na mimi nimesema ikiwa nimechaguliwa na Kasarani taendelea kuongoza nchi hii. Hakuna kushindwa, hatuwezi kushindwa kuongoza. Hatuwezi hiyo, na tutoe garanti hiyo, hatuwezi kushindwa. Kuongoza tu na kuketi na watu na kupanga maendeleo tu, hatuwezi kushindwa.